All right, so Molly Zuckerman-Hartung is a painter and writer living and working in Norfolk. She teaches in the low residency MFA program at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and is currently Senior Critic in Painting Printmaking at the Yale School of Art. Zuckerman-Hartung received a BA from the Evergreen State College in 1998 and an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2007. She has shown internationally and in group shows at the Walker Art Center, Minneapolis, and the 2014 Whitney Biennial. She has also had solo shows in New York, Chicago, Miami, and Karlsruhe. She is a 2013 recipient of the Louis Comfort Tiffany Grant. Zuckerman-Hartung co-founded the Julius Caesar Project Space in Chicago in 2007, and she is one of the founding organizers of LadyFest 2000, a feminist conference and performance showcase that has been revived around the world since. She has written essays on Susan Sontag, Michelle Grabner, Carrie Schneider, and Magali Guerin. And in 2012, she wrote the 95 Theses on Painting. So welcome, Molly. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Should I go ahead and get started?
Yes, please go right ahead.
All right. I'm going to put it on gallery for a minute. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Kelly. And I'm really happy to be here. And I just wanted to say a big thanks to Anne and a really warm thanks to Eileen for putting so many notes in my studio to invite me to do this. It is a real honor. I'm really have been so happy to be in Norfolk. My partner, Fox Hyson, who's also a painter, and I moved here. I think it's been, we always forget, but I think it's been a solid 3 years since we bought our house and moved here. And yeah, it's just been really, really wonderful. I don't know, people invite us places. There's this sense that we're really welcome. I love the sort of size of the village, and I love the library. So I'm just really happy to be here. All right, I guess I was gonna start, maybe I'll just read something and then I'll go into to a PowerPoint. I'm actually in my studio, and I think that I maybe will suddenly do like a sort of show of the studio on the screen, but I am gonna, basically give you a PowerPoint lecture because it's sort of easier to see the images. But I'll just gonna read you something that I just wrote. I am a gatherer and a drifter. When I have tried to push or direct, I lose the wind in my sails. Forgive me if I mix metaphors or change direction midstream. I am following something that I cannot understand. I pour paint and allow materials to have their own movement, but rarely is anything as torrential and gorgeously formed as a Chinese landscape painting or Paul Jenkins' whorls. Manet's sailboats used to mesmerize me at the Art Institute of Chicago, where I went to graduate school and taught for 8 years. I think about language of the abyss, language of the whorl, the descriptions of torrential weather. I've been watching video footage, satellite footage of fires on the West Coast where I'm from. And I've been thinking about these kinds of forms and the kind of, I've long been drawn to these shapes and forms that are just the pooling of water, the movement of air, the movement of wind. And they suddenly feel like they're on the front page of the news. And so that makes them feel very different. So I'm going on thinking about and being in landscape, but wondering about the kind of politics of landscape. A little bit more. Green in Connecticut, so very green in June, when every green thing, every leaf and blade of grass and all the invasive species have opened their brightest green in layers, and a soft, fluttering but dense feeling. Green made of billions of spots of green, darker and bluer to bright yellow green, hunter and jade, avocado and moss. I love the softer greens, the wintry lichen on the rocks, cool blue-green, whiteness and crisp, roughly edges like lace on a Connecticut table. Delicate and private. Connecticut green shrouds the white houses in a scratchy afghan of green, basements flooding, huddled in green puddles, the gentle green surrounds. Bittersweet creepers, buckthorn tree, Norwegian maples, thick rapacious green, budding early, masses of seeds. The horror of weeds and their mammoth reproductive systems. I'll stop there and go ahead and get started and show you some paintings. Can you see that? Are we in the share screen? Okay. This is Fox, my partner. We painted, this is on the Milford Beach on the Long Island Sound. And it was at the solar eclipse. You can see Fox is wearing her glasses. We decided to paint the solar eclipse. Neither of us are plein air painters. Fox is maybe better at it than I am, but neither of us is, we're both abstract painters. But it was fun to paint the eclipse. You know, it was about 8 hours of the light changing. So I'm going to sort of pepper this talk with these quotes, and hopefully I can read them all because they're slightly covered, from this essay by Fanny Howe called Bewilderment. And it starts, what I have been thinking about lately is bewilderment as a way of entering the day as much as the work. Bewilderment as a poetics and an ethics. I'm going to try to say very little about the actual paintings and drawings. This is a screen print. This is a large, like 7-foot tall painting. This is about 6 feet wide. And I am very open to questions, and if I'm not saying enough, I'm happy to say that I've been wanting to talk less and immerse myself in my practice more as a visuality, as a materiality, very much as a sense of texture. I'm going to show you a lot of experiments, a lot of little sort of almost like toys that I've made. Jointed things, things that move. This is silk screen. It's about a 6-foot tall painting. More from Fanny Howe. Increasingly, my stories joined my poems and their methods of sequencing and counting. I would have to say that something like a wave and a particle theory troubled the poetics of my pages. How can two people be in two places simultaneously, and is there any relationship between imagination and character? And these are some more elaborate objects. So these are from about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when Fox and I lived in Shelton in a large warehouse space. And these are from when I was working in my studio in the top floor of our house over on Laurel Way Extension. So the sort of sculptural object got a little bit more elaborate, but still very funky. I'm mostly showing you work from the last few years. Didn't want to go back too far either. This is in my studio right here on Greenwoods Road. And it's a book, it's an art history book by Barbara Rose. And I've been doing a lot of this folding lately, but this one is the entire book removed and folded and threaded on a single column. And the cover is there at the top. Another of these sort of small, I don't know, I think of them as toys or games. This one is sort of like a little stage. The character, the little figure, is actually from a Nancy Spiro, so I've sort of stolen her. Always when I use figures, they're stolen. They're not inventions. They're more like dolls or puppets that I'm sort of pulling in from the outside world as kind of figures of imagination. But I've been thinking more and more about these little stages. I've made a lot of them in the last few years, and maybe especially since Zoom, they've felt very relevant as sort of funny little ideas of performance. Just getting something to stand up in a very basic way, but never, I should definitely say it's really important to me that I don't make things that are hard to make technically. I'm not a technician or a craftsperson. The funk is always sort of part of it for me. This is a Sam Gilliam painting that I'm very, very moved and influenced by his practice. I'll show you a few other works. I have been a teacher for many years, and so I spend most of my time really talking about other people's work and looking at other people's work. And so I'm not going to do too much of it in this talk, but I wanted to include a few. It's very hard to see this. I'm going to read it this way and then go back in. A signal does not necessarily mean that you want to be located or described. Again, this is from Fanny Howe's Bewilderment. It can mean that you want to be known as unlocatable and hidden. This contradiction can drive the eye in the lyrical poem into a series of techniques that are the reverse of the usual narrative movements around courage, discipline, conquest, and fame. I told myself I wanted to put my timer on. This is myself in front of a painting that I made in, I believe it was my post-bac year, so 2004, as I was studying painting. This is a bit of a quote from Adrienne Rich's Diving into the Wreck. The thing I came for, the wreck and not the story of the wreck, the thing itself and not the myth, the drowned face always staring toward the sun. So there's a lot of thrashing about and a lot of excess and a lot of materiality and pouring and spraying and painting over and covering up. And I destroy a heck of a lot of paintings and always have, work them too much. And maybe hence this desire to talk about or bring up Bewilderment by Fanny Howe, as it's a very important text for me. I've read it many, many times and bring it to all my students. And it's been more than difficult to be a sort of champion of bewilderment or failure or being lost, and also be a professor at Yale. They're in direct contradiction. It hasn't been easy to do that. I think it's been really, it's a necessary role for young artists, for students to experience and be able to think through the possibilities of a flop, of a catastrophe, of a problem, of a mess, of a failure. But it's a hard thing to be the one that brings that. And I've been thinking a lot about that because Yale, as we all know, is a success institution. This painting is called Anti-Expeditious. In other words, not trying to do the most efficient route. This is a still shot from a talk I gave at the Evergreen State College. I was the visiting artist at University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and I decided while I was there to work with the color purple. So I spent the entire time basically trying to push purple as far as I could in every direction while still maintaining purple. So that was the studio space at the time, and the work ended in this kind of installation piece. It was in a show actually about schizophrenia in Arkansas, and I was asked to be the keynote speaker. So I ended up doing a lot of research on kind of the history of not just schizophrenia itself, but the ways it had been used in culture as metaphor. It was a really big idea in the 1960s. People like R.D. Laing and others were really into this kind of explosion of the self, or a sense of simultaneity, or an inability to make a kind of narrative, a kind of linear narrative with an idea of a subject. And so these were really interesting ideas to me. This is another, I think, screenshot from that talk. So it's a very blurry image, a lot of staining and pouring, and there's images embedded in this one. This was actually in a show called Chlorophyll Blue S. And I wrote a lot about chlorophyll and green. Again, I think a lot about green. We probably all do. Or not. Oh. Sorry, it stopped working for me for a second. This is a maybe about 6 foot tall painting, and it's got these seams in it. It started as this painting on the left, and then I cut the central piece out and reversed it and put it back together. So this is the final version. So the sides that you're seeing are the back side of the painting, and then the central piece is the front. And of course, this is a kind of reference to Barnett Newman and his zip paintings. The painting on the left is something I made when I was a postbac in graduate school, so back in 2004, and I was just studying artists like the Zero group, thinking about the monochrome, and I made this folded painting, and then I didn't know what to do next. It was sort of like there was a kind of clarity to that painting that I needed to spend many more years to catch up to. And my advisor at the time, who's now a dear friend, Michelle Grabner, looked at one side of my studio, which was full of kind of like tangled self-portraits and paintings of trees and lots of spills and colors and things. And then this other side of the studio where this painting and a few very similar to it were. And she said, if you can do this, referring to the folded painting, why would you do this? And it was she's right, and I don't know. And it's a meaningful decision though, to do both or to find it a problem. And I think it has to do with sort of trying to figure out what to follow and how to follow it. And I follow color, and I need to follow color even more. And I follow a feeling. And I think figuring out how to find that feeling and then how to follow it is a lot of the work. The painting on the right, what does it matter who is speaking? Someone said, what does it matter who is speaking is a kind of different path. It's a quote by Samuel Beckett. It's Michel Foucault who quoted him, and it's done in the style of Christopher Wool. It's another painting I made in graduate school. It's about 7 feet tall. It's long gone. This is where that painting on the left ended up. Another shot from the Evergreen lecture. There I am speaking about the painting. Another quote from Fanny Howe: weakness, fluidity, concealment, and solitude find their usual place in the dream world where the sleeping witness finally feels safe enough to lie down in mystery. Can't actually see it all. These qualities are not the stuff of stories of initiation and success. This is a painting I made in 2014, and there it is in the Whitney Biennial. It's the painting that says no back there on the wall. The letters are cut out and then stitched back in, and I used a lot of spray paint, a lot of house paint, and then a Dremel to drill those spots on it. And maybe you can tell inside the O is actually cut, sort of shredded. In the foreground here are sterling rubies, ashtrays or dog dishes. This is over on the left is an Amy Silman and Pam Lynn's collaboration. And you can kind of see the Sheila Hicks textile in the center there. There I am talking about it. This is my mother wearing a mask in a video that I made that was shown at the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Riverside, California a few years ago. Sort of, mostly I just have a few paintings that I've made recently to show you now. And so this is from the making of that video. It's in an Airbnb in New Haven. And I was kind of doing this color blocking on the wall and then projecting films by Chantal Ackerman, and then I would sometimes pose in front of them. So this is a bit of that film. And I also put this mirror on the wall, so you can see me actually in that little round mirror. And then this film eventually became, or this video became, here it is actually projected on the wall. And I then placed more color blocking pieces of canvas, maybe you can tell, on the wall and projected these images. So there's this intense amount of layering of these color squares, which I started just thinking, just as I was putting this talk together, that these things appear. So this is a painting that I made maybe around the same time, actually, made up of pieces from a whole sort of 5-year period of traveling and sort of sewing them back together. And I suddenly was just linking this work very clearly. And then this is a painting that I just made maybe 6 months ago, thinking about how strongly linked all this work is. If anybody does have any questions, I'm totally welcome. Interruptions or questions.
I have a question, Molly. This is Anne. Havmeyer. I was just curious. You've shown a lot of texts that quotes that inspire you. When you exhibit your work, do you also exhibit the texts? And does your work have titles? Do you entitle your paintings?
They do have titles, yeah, and often kind of involved. The titles come from all different places. I think of them very much in terms of poetics, not in terms of like a system. But I don't remember the titles unless, you know, that's sort of like I give them to the galleries and I let them go. And so when the paintings are exhibited, they have titles, and that language was there. And then this language, I guess I think of the language as very performative and very sort of temporal, right? It's sort of like, now here's this talk, here's these words. They don't stick to the work, and I don't really want them to. And that even the titles, right? It's sort of, yeah.
Interesting. So it's really not an integral part of the painting.
I think coming out of a struggle between language and color and language and material, the work comes out of that fundamentally, but the specific words,
yeah,
not attached. Yeah. It turns out any of the words that really matter, I just keep saying them over and over anyway. Or maybe they don't matter, I'm just trying to get rid of those. This is a little studio installation. I thought of it as a museum. It was like a proposal for a museum, this piece. You can sort of see the textured, and then the paintings that are kind of propping it up. This is a Ree Morton piece that I really love. Some drawings.
Molly?
Yeah?
This is Jenny Clark. Going back to that Reed Morton and also to the Sam Gilliam, you talk about loving things and being moved by artwork. Can you tell us why you are moved by these pieces or why you like them?
Yeah, wow, why? The Ree Morton, well, she's just an incredibly important artist to me, both for her story, which I think was about...
Can you go back to her piece?
Yeah. Gosh, how do I talk about Ree Morton? She really brought in the land in her work. She died quite young. She didn't have a long career, and she started kind of late. She was a single mother. I was raised by a single mother, so I think that aspect of her story, and how her relationship to her children and to place and to teaching got into her work, I think is really meaningful to me. The work is very based in space and place, and landscape, and often in very humorous ways. Maybe this piece isn't a good example of that. This piece is more relational, I guess. And she also made a lot of these small pieces that had different people's names on them, people that she loved, people that she was in artistic and life community with, and people who died of AIDS. And so I think her relationship to other people, her work is made with so much love, and it was about love, and her life was so much about that kind of enthusiasm and love The light keeps turning itself down. I don't know exactly why. And so this one, I guess, feels like that. It feels like this funny sort of, I've said things like this to audiences before, this kind of, I won't bore you, or, you know, there's something so, maybe there's something so female about it. Maybe it's self-effacing, it's funny. And then I think it also implies that there's so much more, there's so much excess, right? I think there's something about her work that feels really excessive to me, that feels like, because it's made with love, that there feels like there's too much. And I think that's so important. And I guess I feel that way with Sam Gilliam. That actually might be the simplest way to say it. With those folds, Sam Gilliam's work is always about this kind of like excess, all these folds, all this density. He never stretched things tight, or he rarely did. It was always too much. And so it becomes more about, how do you spare the audience the burden of it or something? Or how do you find people who will take it in or take it on? This is actually a perfect example too. This Ellsworth Kelly, this is a photograph that Ellsworth Kelly took in the 1960s in Paris. And then this is the painting that, one of many paintings that came out of that experience. And again, I think for me, this is about a kind of spatial excess, a kind of like a density of space, a depth that he's found a way to flatten and to give it to you in this clean way. And I think Ellsworth Kelly did that over and over again. But that it comes out of this sense of light and space and depth and movement of the staircase. I don't know why my computer keeps getting confused or tired. Was that a decent explanation?
Yes. I should note that for people who are not familiar with the artists who you're referring to, like myself, we don't have the background that you do in where these people are coming from. And there's no formal quality. There are few formal qualities about the work that are traditionally interesting to me. So you're really asking me to forget about all the things that I love in order to embrace this artwork. And it's very challenging. So I needed to find out why you like them. And I see that it's somewhat formal, but it's mostly the emotional impact of them on you.
Yeah, I think the emotional impact, I think that's a really helpful thing. Thank you so much for saying that. It's really helpful to think about it that way. The formal becomes, the emotional becomes embedded in the formal. And how I understand the formal is through a set of feelings that are transformed or modified by the forms. I mean, I think I would actually say that my entire project on some level has been to find ways to translate the formal into something that could be understood emotionally, and then maybe back into the formal again. Because I've experienced with students, I mean, I have no idea what your taste is, but with students, they come into art with a set of tastes that are really unschooled. And I didn't get to art school. I didn't know anything about, this is a little stage, I'll just travel through these. And I didn't know anything about high art. I didn't know anything about minimalism, for example, until I got to grad school. I was 30 years old, 29. And so I was this like older student who was really naive and didn't get it and didn't understand the histories. And so it became very important to me to learn these histories and to read about these artists and to find out why. And I suppose for me, if I didn't like it, that was just a reason to read more about it. If I didn't sort of love it immediately, I wanted to dig in and find out more, because I wanted to know what were the values of the culture that I live in? You know, what has been preserved, what's been cared about. Before being an artist, I was working in used bookstores. I'm a book person to the core. And so I'd already spent, 12 years working in used bookstores. And I had a sense of the canon, the values of literature, of, you know, what and why we held on to things and what things I thought needed to be held on to that had not been. And so I moved into art with a set of similar questions, you know, what matters, what's valuable? And then a strong agenda to make the things that I care about also value. But it's definitely been a kind of set of arguments, or, you know, I've had to learn and change with it. This is the back side of a little stage. There's the front side. And then these are more recent, well, so this is recent too, but these super recent works that I've been making, these little folded pieces, folded paper pieces. And most of the work that I'm going to show you now is all on exhibition right now in Chicago at my gallery, Corbett versus Dempsey. This one's called In Praise of Shadows, after the essay. This is a Joan Snyder piece. It's called Norfolk, and it was made when she was here, back in, I think it's like 1979 or 6 or something like that. She was a student at the School of Art across the street. This is a quilt that I just made. It's not hand stitched. It's done with my big industrial sewing machine. It's got a wool blanket as the central piece. It's in between a kind of handicraft and something else. And so a lot of my paintings are made with seams. These are the recent works. This is 7 feet tall. It's oil paint, oil staining, dyes, and then this bit of canvas that's sewn in. These are details. This one's called Color Steps. Actually, this one's called This Neck of the Woods. Just because I just named them, I still remember their titles. So maybe you can tell there's a lot of dyeing on this, and then those circles are all painted with thick oil paint. So there's just very different textures happening. And the seams, so I, you know, make these paintings and then cut them apart and put them back together and then stretch them. And so they're very much onto the floor and back into the wall. I think this one's 6 feet tall. This is mostly dye and charcoal. And then it's got these little sort of friendly little friends on the end. One of the things that I've been working on lately is having these kind of standard rhythms in the paintings, whereas before I think the cuts and the seams were kind of more goofy. I've been really trying to get the seams to be rather straight and just in line with the whole rectangle of the painting. And so these kind of additional pieces, the two on the left, sort of play with that. But you can tell the theme of stairs, for example, or steps is kind of a constant. I mean, there's very simple forms that I sort of obsess on. The curve is another one that I've really worked on. I guess this goes to the question of formalism. You know, it's like the zigzag, the step, the curve. These are the things that I'm returning to. These little, I think of them as drawings. And also just ways of collecting little bits of things I've made. I've been thinking a lot about the fold and the kind of possible meanings of the fold, or how, again, it's not like I'm trying to learn to get more complicated folds. There's origami, there's all these really exquisite folding crafts. There's artists like Dorothea Rockburn that have really sort of made exquisite mathematical folded pieces, I'm just more interested in it as a way of setting up a rhythm, a spatial rhythm, but also in the way that it transforms a flat surface into a dimensional surface and allows for what feels like it's maybe more outside to be more inside. That and it does this, you know, all textile, all things that fold have this quality of kind of insides and outsides being a little bit less like clearly differentiated. It's not like a jar where you have the outside and you have the inside. It's more like the outside can become the inside quite quickly. And so, you know, one of my lifelong subjects is just subjectivity itself, interiority, the life of the reader, you know. And I think the way that these things are made out of paper and look book-like, you know, paper and stitching, they have that kind of quality. They feel more desk available, more amenable to bits of writing. So to your question, Anne, about the writing, like these do have little bits of poetry inserted in them, little bits of language, and it feels okay. They feels like they can hold that. There's that funny piece again. So this is, you know, this is like a 7-year-old piece. Again, I'm like returning to these ideas. This is my studio when I was in Shelton. This is all work in progress for a show called Learning Artist at Rachel Effner Gallery on the Lower East Side in New York. So you can see this is one of the studio looks different depending on what kind of process I'm in and also what kind of space it is, what city it's in.
What are those materials? Is that silk or canvas, and is it oil or
it's
dye?
linen and dye on linen. I just bought 4 bolts of linen, the whole bolt. So not like stretching canvas linen, but very sort of more like clothing linen.
Thank you.
Yeah. So they sort of performed around my studio for a while before they went off and had their life. There's that no painting. It's got this hinge. So at some point I performed in it. This is maybe the first artwork I ever made. It's a self-portrait. I was maybe 19 and I was making, I made a pinhole darkroom in my house. I was living in this punk house called the House of Doom and in Olympia. And so this was, it's, you know, it's like a contact printed negative that you just put inside of a shoebox and make the shoebox totally light controlled, and you have a perfectly round hole. And you just put the photo paper on one end and the hole at the other end, and you put the camera down on the ground. And then I went and stood naked at the other side of the room. This is a painting I just started working on. It's in my studio right now. More of these folded things. This is more like a figure. This will be in a show. It just got picked up today, a little show curated by Jared Quinton up in Williamstown at a new space he just opened called Poker Flats. Just a few more pieces to show you. That's canvas, it's dyed. Sorry, the quality's a little blurry on this one. That's a screen print, and then there's a bit of velvet that's kind of stitched into it. It's just a screen print on newsprint, and then wool thread and velvet. These are recent oil paintings. They're all 20 by 24 inches.
What is the grid for?
You mean the pencil grid here?
Yeah.
I think it was just a step in sort of getting to know the space. I guess that's the clearest way I could describe it. I do a lot of grids. I love grids. I love grid paintings more and more and more. And I guess what I like about them is that very different kinds of feelings through the materials and the colors and the scale and everything else and the quality of the grid, whether it's precise or funky. You get totally different feelings out of them, but it's always the grid. There's something sort of like, there's a way in which I think that when you use a grid as a painter, it's like you're saying, I consent to be a part of society. I understand that we have to follow, it's like handshake or something, you know, it's a way of saying, I agree, I accept these rules. And then within those rules, you can do whatever the hell you want. And you can express and you can feel and you can be complicated and difficult, but because you've said, yes, I agree. There's something very meaningful about that for me.
Thank you. That was great.
Just read you a bit more of the bewilderment, and then I think I'm almost done. In the dictionary, to bewilder is to cause to lose one's sense of where one is. The wilderness as metaphor is, in this case, not evocative enough because causing a complete failure in the magnet, the compass, the scale, the stars, and the movement of the rivers is more than getting lost in the woods. Bewilderment is an enchantment that follows a complete collapse of reference and reconcilability. It cracks open the dialectic and sees myriads all at once. Bewilderment circumambulates, believing that at the center of errant or circular movement is the axis of reality. And I think that this is the last couple ones. There we go. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much for your questions too. It's really helpful, Anne and Jennifer. The longer I do this, the longer I make art, the longer I teach and give talks and all these things, the more I'm in a place where I'm wherever I am, right? But there's a million thoughts that you have to just sort of leave them behind and move on to the next thought. But if somebody asks, it's really nice to think about it again and to think about why you have made those decisions. I think it's really generous to ask those kinds of questions.
A question.
Yeah.
So this is Kelly from the Norfolk Library. I didn't realize that no painting was the size that it was until you were standing in it. And some of the earlier ones you showed, you said like they were 7 feet tall, 6 feet tall. Do you know that the painting is going to be that big when you get started, or does it evolve and you just say, no, I need more? Like, how does that process work?
That's such a good question. I think it's like, I think for a lot of painters, it's, of course, immediately when you stretch the canvas, you've made the decision about the size. But for me, many things start off the stretcher and have a life that takes a long time to get onto the stretcher. And sometimes they're made out of many pieces. And so the size sometimes is, I mean, in the best case scenario of the still difficult, I've been working on this thing for a long time and it's finally kind of reached a relatively rectangular structure. And then I measure it and try to figure out how much I'm going to need to stretch around. And I build a stretcher for it specifically. That's one of the procedures in which, that size is decided upon. I mean, there's all sorts of problems with big paintings. I'm sort of exhausted by them. And yeah, I don't know, I get sick of it. And I also don't always want things to be stretched, but these are things that have, it's like my gallerist in New York wants them stretched and wants them big. And I think when I was younger, I would have been rebelling against that, And now I'm sort of like, I can continue to make, you know, large stretched things, but I need to allow myself to make other things too. So it's sort of like, I guess I have a gentler attitude towards that these days. But yeah, there was also a time when I was making all of my large paintings were the size of a double bed. That was a strict rule. And then there was another time period where all of the larger paintings were the size of the windows in my loft in Shelton, which was quite large. And I was making these paintings I called dirty windows that had these kind of folds and these material pores. But you know, my loft there looked out of I don't know, like what's it called, a brown site. There was like a giant toxic disaster going on right outside the windows. So I was thinking about the window not always being like a pretty picture, right? The window is the sort of, you know, oldest metaphor for what a painting is. Of course, Rauschenberg gave us the idea that the bed would be another idea for what the painting was. So these sort of measurements are coming out of art history too. So there's so many different answers for the question of size. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Because now would be a great time to unmute and go ahead and ask.
Molly, I have a question about a particular piece, but first I just want to say, wow, you are talented, girl. I mean, I just have loved, you know, the quilt and then the colors and the folding. It's just, I'm a little blown away by it. But the piece I wanted to ask about is it was white. And your teacher had said, why do you, if you can do this, why do you do that? I want to know what that was made of. And then I remember, if I remember correctly, you said like 2 slides later, that turned into something else. And I want to know about that.
Cool, that's an amazing question. It's made out of canvas. So, and it's 2 feet by 2 feet, but it's just raw canvas, unprimed or anything. And to get it to hold together, you know, usually you stretch a canvas with staples, right? You get like a big industrial stapler and you have various thicknesses of staples. But for that, I used this older kind of canvas stretching. It's kind of like a furniture tack that like European canvases are still stretched with. And so they have like a spike, like a point at the end, and then they're kind of like raw triangle metal, and they have a little kind of hammered head. So I hammered every one of those in because the canvas was way too thick as I folded it to get it to stick together.
Yeah.
The backside's kind of beautiful. And then I guess the other, how did it become the black? I mean, there is this very important painting in abstract painting history, The Black Square by Malevich, and it was, you know, put in the corner. Basically, Malevich was a Russian painter, a Russian revolutionary painter who wanted to get rid of the icon, the Russian icon, which was religious, and they were trying to make a whole new society. This is like one of the founding paintings of abstraction. They were trying to, you know, they had the Russian Revolution, right? They were trying to take down the monarchy, and they figured that the monarchy and the church had a very deeply entangled set of religious and political values, and that to get rid of the political structures of their time, they had to get rid of the church too. So they replaced, his idea was the icon always hung, you know, in the corner of the room. And so he made this black square and he hung it in the corner of the room as a kind of a negation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
so did you dye it or did you paint it?
yeah, I just painted it with black paint, black like latex paint. Mm-hmm. And then let me just show you real quick. And then
it almost looked like weaving to me.
Then I drizzled. And so this has been like a kind of constant thing. I've returned to it again and again, is to fold in one direction and then to drip or drizzle paint along those folds as a kind of a kind of counter movement. And then because the paint goes into every single fold, but also sits on the surface. And then I painted over that with oil paint. So it's actually white drizzled, but it felt too high contrast for me, and I just kind of kept wanting to return it to just plain black. But you can kind of see the The black is sitting in the cracks. Yeah, but this is oil paint on top, and this is like a latex acrylic paint.
Wow, thank you.
What did you just say it looked like? Like a weaving?
It did. Yeah, I almost thought it might be like some sort of basket.
Yeah, I think that's
wondering how that metamorph, you know, how that transformation occurred. So
yeah, I've returned to this, like I said, this folding and then the putting the paint along it. I didn't put any of those in this talk, but I'm interested in it for exactly that reason, that it feels like a weave, but it's not a weave. Yeah.
Molly's Tripperzell, I noticed in your early slides, you had a lot of geometric forms connected, and then later on you had your circles in a line. Is that kind of a recurring early theme that you had?
Circles in a line. I'm just looking back through to see what geometric forms connected. I mean, definitely, I would say, it's funny, I mean, to sort of like really go back to like why any of these things. I fell in love with abstract painting, you know? I studied it. I was making things, like I said, I went into school making self-portraits, portraits of celebrities, paintings from photographs, you know, and I just fell in love with abstract painting, with the questions, with the ideas, with the materials, with the everything, the formalism, you know, the shapes, like a series of shapes in a row, like just all the different things that people would do with it were so exciting to me. So a lot of what I've done is sort of borrowed language, played with other people's language. I think of it as language, and I think of them, you know, like a poet. Like you take the language and you riff on it, right? I guess I'm sort of like riffing on various things all the time, and then returning to them, and even like just the writing that I just shared, the green, you know, like the repetition of the green, of the word green, something like that. Maybe you could link up. It's like repetition and rhythm, or something I'm getting more and more excited about all the time.
I have another question.
Okay.
No one else does. Who do you get feedback from? What's your community of artists that helps inspire you?
My partner, of course, Fox. We talk all the time. I mean, I send pictures to my mom a lot, actually. I always want to know what she thinks. And my dad, they're both really, my mom is a serious gardener, like a master gardener, and has an incredible sense. I mean, she'll just build a whole new garden when she moves into a new house. And even in a new ecology, you know, like she just moved from Washington State to Idaho, and there's a totally different set of rules, and it's a different zone and everything. So that's huge. And my dad is an architect. And so they're both sort of heavily visual, spatial people. So I actually do run almost everything by them eventually. But during the pandemic, a bunch of, well, I don't know, 4 or 5 female friends and I started doing Zoom book groups. And then we turned it into a studio group. And that's been really amazing. Partially because there's 2 poets in the group. One is a poet painter and one is poet primarily. And the rest of us are all sort of heavy writers too. And so it's a very sort of bookish kind of literary visual conversation. And I just find that that is actually really helping me sort of stay with the things I care about, you know. It really helps to have people of like mind, you know, or close mind.
Yay. Molly, this isn't a question, but just because you love folding, paper folding and books, a good week or so ago, we had Erica Crowfoot work with the kids to do a parade of creatures, I think it's called. Most of them were birds, but they were discarded books. You should, next time you come in, you should check them out. They're hanging in the entry, and they're folded books that they decorated, painted, and then they would discard the books, and then the kids, she taught them how to fold the papers, the pages any way that they wanted to, and then she created a head and a tail to put on each side, and they're just really cool. They have the whole folding art, and they're made out of books. They're so you.
They're so mean. No, they sound amazing. I'll come right in and see them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds really, really nice. And I think that feeling is exactly what I'm going for. Like, I mean, toys or like things that children make are like where it's at.
Yeah. Yeah, your work is very childlike in the best sense of the word. It's very happy and alive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's
It's wonderful.
Thanks so much.
So talented. My goodness.
Yes, I loved one in particular, one of the folded ones before the white one. It was probably 4 slides or maybe. What struck me were the colors that you applied to this. I think it was a very large folded piece, maybe one of the ones on display now somewhere.
Oh, yes, I know what you're talking about. You,
Beautiful blue on it. And I thought, this is a thing of wonderful beauty. And I wondered to myself if it was okay to feel, yes, that was it. That's it.
Yeah.
I love it. I just think it's striking and beautiful.
And you wondered if it was okay.
Well, I did, because you've been talking a lot about sort of bewilderment and materiality and, you know, emotion. And I mean, I know beauty, it's an emotion to feel beauty, but it's also brings a sense of serenity, and which is the opposite of bewilderment, kind of. So yeah, that thought crossed my mind when I saw it. I was impacted by the feeling of calm and beauty in that piece. I loved it.
I think that's really, really wonderful. Thank you, Anne. I think that, of course, it's okay. I mean, part of the reason I say that the language doesn't stick to it or needn't stick to it is so that things are open for people to have their own experience of them. Yeah. You know, I think that any artist worth their salt sort of needs to get to that place, you know, of just, it is whatever you want to experience of it, you know. It's not and I definitely aim for beauty these days, and you know, I have had my own struggles around beauty and the values of beauty, but I mean, it's especially as the world becomes more bewildering, I think it's something, it's difficult to make something that feels, well, I think that, I mean, that's sort of a recent revelation for me. You know, it's quite, the Chinese calligraphers, for example, you know, like there's a reason it takes a lifetime to do something like that. I think grace, or a sense of, you know, being able to put the weight where it belongs and put the lightness where it belongs, and to have something feel that you want to live with it, or something, is not easy. So, yeah.
The piece I loved was a gradation of different colors, and there was a pattern that was consistent on each one of the folds. It looked like a curtain that had been gathered. Can you bring that up again?
Which one would that be?
Oh, like purple, blue, green, red, and it was it was stained on a canvas.
Yeah. This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really great. How big is that again?
Yeah, it's not big enough yet. This is actually one I would like to make much bigger. It's 2.5 feet tall or something, 12, 24, 30 inches tall, maybe.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that needs to be 6, 7.
Totally. I totally agree. It's
Yeah.
rather unwieldy and sort of, there's a lot of moving parts to it, and I still haven't figured out the color for sure. But yeah, I'm gonna make this one bigger. This is sort of more of a, thanks, I'm glad you like it.
And Molly, are your pieces for sale in your studio?
You know, I've never sold anything out of, well, that's not true. I guess back when I was younger, I would sell out of my studio. I mean, sure, if you come talk to me, I basically sell through my galleries. But yeah, I mean, I'm not adverse to it. I would, you know, have some sort of special Norfolk price or something. We also, Fox and I, this is maybe a great time to make this plug before I say goodbye. Fox mostly, but I've been helping, has started this artist residency in Norfolk. It's called Greenwoods 2058. And it's literally like the backside of the building here that I'm in, 58 Greenwoods Road. So my studio's in the front, and then the artist residency is in the back and on the 3rd floor. And we just rent out the 2nd floor. And the front is a little tiny shop that we've got about 12 artists that are part of this, the collective, and the artists can choose the residents over time. But we've also made multiples to sell in the shop. And so whenever we have a talk or something, that will be posted on the website, and hopefully we'll get it to like the Norfolk Now, and they'll send out an email or something. We're not very good with the mailing list yet, but we're working on it. But so there's also that there's this little art shop that, you know, if you're interested in art.
Excellent. Yeah.
A way to support the residency. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Molly, for giving us this wonderful overview of your work, which I feel now, and I'd really love to see it. And, you know, I feel like we really all need to see it, the actual piece, and hopefully we can at some point. So it's
well, you know, I'm here all the time, and I wouldn't say stop by anytime, but, you know, if you wanted to peek in sometime, I'm here.
Yeah.
So yeah, happy to host an occasional visit.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Molly.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we will, as Kelly said, we have recorded this, so we're going to send it to Molly for her approval, and then we can send it to all participants. And if Molly approves, we'll post it on our YouTube channel. So we have another Tuesday tour coming up in August. We'll just say now, Hillary Van Wright
Yeah.
is going to do a Tuesday tour for us on August, I believe it's 17th. Is that right?
I thought it was the 10th, but.
And then, of course, we have Fox coming in September.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you're definitely going to want to see her work as well.
And
So,
Hillary is a member of the residency of the collective. So.
oh, great. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Is
Yeah.
that 58 Greenwoods East or West?
West.
Okay.
By the ambulance.
Yeah. It used to be the old Norfolk drugstore. I don't know if you know that, but we have a
Okay.
picture of what it looked like in 1890.
Oh, I'm going to come and see that picture.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
It doesn't look
Our
empty.
neighbor told us that it was the old weaver's shop
Oh, might have been that too.
at the
But
drugstore in
we have a pic-
1890.
yeah, we have a picture of it when it was the Norfolk drugstore, the early 20th century Norfolk drugstore.
That
Wow.
explains how, like, why it's so big. Then
Yes.
it all
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. So there's this one big room that's like over 400 square feet. We are
Yeah.
always trying to figure out, why would they ever have made such a large room?
There it is. There it is.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know it used to be a drugstore. That's so interesting. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming also. This was really, really fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, Molly. And I guess we'll end our program now. So we hope to see you all. Stay tuned for more from us.
Have a good night, everyone.
Everybody,
Thank you.
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.